Okay, so I'm gonna go back in history and back to October, where Trae, Melanie, and I were in a conversation and talking about how to scale the WINfinity work and matrixing. So Melanie and I suggested, why don't we use the radical transformation leadership tools that we've been using successfully to just kind of pull these things out to get the thinking going. So that's why we then asked the practitioners cohort for 4 hours worth of time to pick their brain. And that's what we did in October. So let me just share my screen to share what we did back then. So can somebody just please manage the chat? If there's any questions, just unmute yourself and ask, or I'm not going to look at the chat. I'm just going to look at my screen. So let me know if there's something you want to ask about. So we went through this exercise back in October to really flush out the project that we were thinking of. And we then ended up doing a brainstorming session to really say, if we're going to scale matrixing, what would that look like? And what obstacles, issues, anything we can think of in that visioning of scaling this work. So everybody threw stickies down, everybody had their own color, and Wendy and Trae then went ahead and sorted this out, sorted them into groups. I mean, and I actually remember I was at a regenerative farm here in Costa Rica called Home Farm. And as I watched everybody do this work, it just became very clear to me, a big message, that the only way we could sort out what the heck all this meant was for us to do what's called an interrelationship diagram. I've done them before in my corporate world, and they were typically a day-long exercise. So I thought it would be just a few hours. Well, obviously I was wrong about that. So anyways, we started on this journey, and Pranjit started with us. And what we were doing really was, and actually I'm going to apologize because I was going to go through my agenda just so you guys know what I'm going to cover. So let me just jump to that right now. So I was going to give you the background, which I'm doing now. Well, I guess it's not really important to go through this. It's pretty obvious how I'm doing it. So what the three of us were doing then was taking a random sticky, just one at a time, and then taking another sticky and saying, do these two relate directly to each other? If not, forget it, we'll take another sticky. If they do, which one drives the other? Right? So which way does the arrow go? And it was tricky to do first because we're so used to thinking about process flows, right? So it was a bit of a habit change to think of it this way. So yeah, we basically just started putting, connecting the stickies. And we ended up with 4 different maps because this is how they look like. And as you can see, it became hard to manage the arrows. So we just had to keep making new maps. So we ended up with 4 maps like this before we were done. So just so you can see them all. And then, sorry, I'm not sure why it's all loading again. So then the job is to then see, we now need to start counting the arrows, because the stickies that has the most arrows going out are driving a lot of things in WINfinity. I'm just going to call it WINfinity as the whole thing, right? So those are important to identify, right? So this is what we've done here, is basically say this sticky had 44 arrows going out and 9 coming in. So as we went through this whole process, I was asking a lot of questions of Trae, because every time she had to make a decision, are these two connected and which way are they going? We often had to start and debate it, like, what does this actually mean? And luckily, pretty early on, we were working together, and Melanie and I were starting another call, and this woman, Alberta, jumped into the call just saying hi, right? Getting on ready to the next meeting. And she just happened to ask, who's the audience? And we hadn't thought about that. And we realized it's really important. It's like Spirit just came in and asked us a question that was really important for all of this work. Because Trae realized we have to answer all these questions from the perspective of the facilitator and be consistent. So we had to kind of go back and redo a bunch of work. But it just means that everything that we've worked out thus far has been from that perspective, and that's important to realize. And I took a lot of notes on whatever thoughts were coming out of Trae's head as she was thinking through how two stickies might connect. So I wrote a lot of stuff down. We ended up having to create a whole bunch of other stickies that weren't on the original board that the group came up with. So an example, all these khaki colored ones here. These are others that, as we went through all these conversations, we realized this is an important sticky we don't have, and this is another important sticky. So all these khaki colored ones are new ones compared to the ones we did on that first brainstorming as a group. There was some really good thinking here that came out of it. Parmjeet came up with a really beautiful analogy about the matrix being an estuary, which really helped think things through. So that became another sticky as an example. So I think that is enough back. So we went through, we started counting, and through the counting, we set up a system to double check that there weren't any double arrows, right? Because we had so many maps, right? So we had to double check that if, like there could have been 2 arrows here and we didn't realize it. So we didn't want to double count anything. So as we were counting, we also eliminated any doubles. So we feel really good about the numbers that we've come up with. So as we were doing all this, as you can imagine, there's a felt sense. As you start seeing the connections between the stickies and you start seeing a lot of arrows coming out, you start getting a kind of a felt sense of the importance, and you can kind of start patterning out what's going on here. And it's my understanding from Trae that the core team of WINfinity, they ended up recently deciding that e-learning was important, but they didn't have the resources to follow up and do anything about it, so they parked it. And it was one of the stickies with a lot of arrows. So Trae decided she wanted to focus in on the e-learning sticky, and we basically took all the related stickies to the e-learning. And we did that, and then another important sticky was one called breakthroughs and turning points. It was actually an example of a sticky that had the word milestone in it originally. And it wasn't until we changed that word milestone to breakthroughs and turning points that a whole bunch of stuff moved in Trae. Like, it became really important. And as the arrows also showed, that became important. So what Trae ended up doing is taking the graphic she had created for the e-learning, and she's then started creating one for the breakthroughs and turning points, and realized they had to be merged. And that's what I'm going to describe today. We still have to do some counting, which is what Abdul Rahman has now raised his hand to help with, and which we're very grateful for. We're going to start on that next week. But we've taken a lot of the ones we think has the most errors just visually. But there's still a few more lists on that list. So the work is not complete, but this is what we know today. Before I dive into that, I think I'm just going to show you this graph. This gives a really good overview of where WINfinity, what it looks like at this point in time. These are some high-level learnings. And this is also an RTL tool. We call this a transformational results chain, where when we design this, we start with the impact and then figure out what outcomes do you need to make that impact happen, and then what outputs are required to make those outcomes happen, and then what are the inputs required to get those outputs. So that's how you design the work you need to do. And as soon as you have designed this, now you can actually start implementing, right? So now you've got all the inputs you need. You can put it into a project management tool and do all this stuff, right? So now you start with the input, and then you get the outputs and the outcomes and the impacts. So, and I'm not sure how much time do we have left. Yeah, I think I have enough time, but so the inputs that we've learned so far is that what we need to get to this impact is we need to set up social media platforms like TikTok and YouTube Shorts. We need to use memes to model emotional regulations. We need followers on social media, and we need a time banking system, and we need Flint. Those are important inputs we require. And a lot of these things are not set up yet, right? I mean, Flint is kind of, but it has work to do. So we have all these things in order, and they don't all have to be there to move forward, right? These are the outputs then that we're going to have. So for example, the masses are practicing emotional intelligence out there, right? So they're getting memes and they're practicing appreciation conversations, for example, right? And so they're practicing these, and they're learning to emotionally regulate and get these basic skills. And then people are being paid to practice. This is where the time banking system came in. That's Michael Schumann's reverse mechanics. That we can actually pay people to learn these things, which is a whole other conversation. People are now able to listen for common ground and shared values inside these conversations. And we get values-based choice making becoming a norm. So those are the outputs then. So now these are the outcomes, and these are measurable, smart metrics that we want to be able to measure these things. So now we've got appreciation conversations being the heartbeat and giving attention. And many people in the world are now able to do that. Possibility conversations are being about discovering common ground instead of ideation, and what's typical in our conversations today. Humanity knows how to be in right relations with each other and the planet. Humanity is more humane with each other in the midst of this great transition, and we've got collective behavior change. So the impact is we're raising humanity's consciousness, we've got collective intelligence happening, and we've got well-being of people and planet. These are some high-level, it's a proposal at this point in time of how we can move towards that impact. So I think I'm just going to stop. That's a lot. If anybody has any questions or anything before I move on.
Marianne?
Yes.
I'm loving it so far. Makes lots of sense. Can you explain how the outcomes are smart outcomes, though?
Yeah, no, we haven't gone into how exactly we're going to measure that, but they have to be smart outcomes, like measurable. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of rules around how do you actually say that's your outcome.
Yeah,
But
okay.
yeah, I mean, collective behavior change, but it's, we have to be able to measure that. But yeah, so that's a whole other project in itself, figuring out how to make the metrics measurable.
The outcomes, like what you were saying earlier about breakthroughs and turning points, they seem more measurable to me.
Yes, and we're going to get into that now.
Thanks.
Any other thoughts or questions?
Just following through on that one, there's kind of the statement that they have to be smart. Why do they have to be smart?
Good question. So this is part of this tool that Melanie and I have been using, that Monica Sharma has been using for 30 years. Outcome is something you need to be able to measure. So that's just the way it is part of this methodology. But it is also a helpful exercise to go through. If you want to reach this outcome, how do you know you've gotten there? Right? Because you're not going to get to the impact if you haven't actually done these outcomes and gotten to the place. That's the philosophy behind it.
Okay, so it's sort of it's about providing proof as opposed to itself.
And working toward getting there, right? So if we have to know that preaching conversations are the heartbeat, let's say, I don't know, 10% of humanity is using that to communicate, whatever number we come up with. Now we know what do we need to do to get there, right? We need to actually really think that through. Are we talking about countries? Are we talking about cultures? What are we talking about, right? So it forces us to think through what we need to do to get to that place.
Can I add one more thing? Kylie, your question was so great. And the other thing that Monica says, and I'm referencing her book, is that when you have specific measurable outcomes, you're better able to align initiatives and projects such that there's synergy and people can see and feel that synergy to break down silos. So that's another important underlying aspect of her thinking, is that it helps to create this trans-contextual element by being measurable and specific such that people can really grasp it and see how it applies to them and affects them and invites them to break down their silo and become more involved in other aspects that support their project. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm thinking back sort of somewhat to the left hemisphere, right hemisphere stuff that we were talking about previously, which is that measure tends to be associated with left hemisphere, with evidence, proof, science, and knowing maybe for myself, and I don't know how broad this is, just that I'm more often swayed actually by story, by narrative, by unmeasurables. So yeah, so that's where the question came from anyway. But it's not a dissent or a disagreement or anything. It's just a curiosity.
And just to leverage on what Melanie just said, and what the synergies that Monica Sharma is talking about is in this project that, let's say, WINfinity is on, by raising humanity's consciousness and being able to have these conversations, it's going to lift so many other projects like crazy, like our work in whatever community, right? Like so much other stuff is lifted. And so just by knowing how we get there helps us do that work.
And I think it also takes into account the different learners. Like Monica's very much data measurement oriented based. but she includes the importance of storytelling. Actually, from the very beginning of any project is capturing the story to be able to tell it to support the change makers in public so that they don't get their heads cut off when they stick their necks out. You know, she really does get that too. So yeah, your point is well made.
There's just one other add and also to this, because I think I also know in part where Kylie's coming from, is that when we're talking about raising up the commons, we're not just talking about sort of building a market, right? Or setting up an advanced market. In the case of facilitators for the commons, we're ultimately still talking about soft skill development. And soft skill development is fundamentally, the cornerstone of it is conversation. How are we being with each other? Are we making an effort to understand each other? And interestingly enough, I've just spent the last couple of hours diving into the newest research since 2020 on what is actually creating group coherence and teamwork and people working together and being together. And it's not what we thought. So it is everything that we're talking about here, which is about emotionally regulating and how one individual shows up inside of a group. It really is that fundamentally profound. The more we can get one individual practicing, playing, sharing the stories of this is what I tried, this is who I tried it with, this is what worked, this is what didn't work. Hence the inputs of sharing, just literally sharing experiences. It has affirmed or confirmed the pathway that these stickies are pointing us to. The field is pointing us to it before we even had the academic research to back it up. And now we're starting to get the academic research to back it up. So it's a pretty exciting place to be.
Great. Okay, well, I think I'm going to move on. So I'm going to give you a link to a PDF of this, so you can zoom in and out later to really digest this. There's a lot of information here. I'm going to just start by explaining that the line here is the stem cell membrane, and I'm going to go into more details of what that is in a second. Above the cell membrane is the outside world, outside of WINfinity. And inside here is the inside world. And these yellow and green stickies here are basically everything that we need to teach the masses in how to be in this way. So the green stickies that were here, the green stickies here were yellow, but because they end up with a huge count, we turn them into green ones. So the green ones, the ones that are either drivers or a lot of things drive it. And then the orange stickies down here are associated with the DNA or the pattern integrity of WINfinity. And then the infinity sign is the movement in and out of the cell. So let me just talk a little bit more about the cell. So I made a legend up here, and it's important to think of the stem cell membrane as being intelligent. We saw it in the 80s when we did the big DNA project, that the DNA was the intelligent thing that everything runs off. It kind of does, but we've realized that the cell membrane is the intelligence, really. And it translates signals from the outside environment to inform the actions on the inside. So it's an invisible dynamics between the needs and experiences and the learning that people are expressing when practicing the being that we are teaching people on the outside, And then the signals will then translate it into the inside, where the orange stickies, the DNA, and the pattern integrity then gets expressed differently, right? So you've got the DNA and pattern integrity that doesn't change. And then you've got these signals that then expresses that DNA in a different way. And that's why the infinity symbol is so important, as all those learning that's going on outside is being moved inside the cell and then expressed differently in that DNA, right? And then inside the cell, there's a bunch of learning going on. And then that's taken out again. And now people are taking that learning outside and practicing it in their day-to-day lives, in all these different cultures, all these different contexts, right? And when we start getting a lot of people doing that out there, it's going to be so interesting, right? Because someone like trying to teach an appreciation conversation to someone in Korea, and the way they're going to receive that, and the way they're going to express it, and the way they're going to signal something that the cell membrane is now going to pick up on and bring in, is going to be very different from someone in Peru or somewhere else, right? I'm thinking of the vastness of how things are going to be changing and how interesting that's going to be. And it's the field doing it. It's not directed by anything or anyone. So it's a very interesting realization of this is how the field is going to move this along. So again, the yellow stickies are all the topics or the things that we want people to learn to regulate their emotions, and then what the field is telling us. And then the orange stickies are the pattern integrity that responds to the signals that the cell membrane is picking up from the outside. I've also got a glossary here. There are some names that that have come up that we want to explain. So a practitioner is anybody who's practicing the pattern integrity. So practitioners, it could be some person in Siberia practicing appreciation conversation or dissent conversation or something, right? So they're carrying the DNA of that particular thing, and they're practicing it in their day-to-day lives. So that person is now a practitioner. A practitioner cohort is now a group of people, and typically an informal network that just starts to happen, where practitioners are building relationships to share that learning and to give moral support while continuing to practice in these brave spaces out in their everyday lives with their family, work, co-workers and bosses and all that stuff. So they are sustaining and practicing conversation culture. And it's possible that one person just picks up on dissent conversation and the importance of that and just practices that his or her whole life. Or they could move between them all. And just to remind you, here are the different types of conversations that people can start practicing, right? So someone could just be practicing appreciation conversations, or they could be moving through these in a random way because it's e-learning out in the world that is not a course somebody's going through. That's not what this is about. It's about throwing out information in, via YouTube Shorts or TikTok, and people start picking up on it. So there's no direction really. It just kind of whatever the field does with it. So it's interesting because you've seen this obviously many times, the tetrahedron. is that, and that is why these stickies were yellow. These are the pathways for learning by exploring, right? So this is what the field is doing outside the cell. And the pathways for receiving information and the pathways for talking with each other is basically what we've got here, right? So it's like taking this thing and moving it down. And it's this movement that's also happening between all this different learning in all these different ways and all these different people, all these different cultures, that's just moving in and out of the cell. I'm going to stop in a second, but
I just want to pause you here for just one moment, Marianne. The reason that Marianne is spending this much time on this is that the tendency is to think, when we think of WINfinity as a stem cell or like a stem cell, is to think of WINfinity like an organization. I want you to obliterate that from your thoughts. This is not what's happening here. So when we're talking about the membrane and we're talking about what's happening inside and what's happening outside, again, our paradigms and our conditioning are, oh, this is what's inside, this is the silo, this is what's outside of the silo. This isn't about siloing. There's learning happening on both sides of the membrane. The difference is the learning that happens outside in the field it's random, it's unpredictable, it's environmentally and conditionally based. There's so many factors, but it goes where the field needs it to go. The learning that's happening on the quote unquote inside is about going deeper on the DNA, deeper on that pattern integrity DNA. And there was really no difference other than the comprehensive view of the whole picture, right? The people who are playing on the yellow side are just playing with what resonates for them, and that's all that matters to them. They don't want to hear about the whole thing. The people who are playing on the orange side want to get a comprehensive knowledge of the whole thing. They want to be able to lead people through a pathway of learning and matrixing and getting to the final result of values-based decision making. Right? That's ultimately the point, is doing values-based decision making and doing it collectively. You can't get to values-based decision making and doing it collectively if you don't have people who are playing and practicing in conversation and relating and emotional regulation and all those other pieces. So that's why she's focusing on this. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think something else that's important to note is that WINfinity is not saying you have to do it this way. You can have an appreciation conversation based on theory U or something else, right? There's no prescription that way. The important thing is that you understand what an appreciation conversation is and how to practice that. And there's all kinds of colors and ways of doing that. So a facilitator can be someone who's been a facilitator their whole lives. They've dealt with conflict resolution, nonviolent communication, and they pick up one of these YouTube things or memes, and they realize this is something they want to learn more about. So a facilitator is introduced to the pattern integrity and is free to start using that and practicing that in their day-to-day conversations or just in their work or whatever. And then a facilitator becomes another form of a practitioner. So it's also important to point out that this is not a facilitator training thing. It's not a training course for someone to come and learn how to facilitate using this way of being. We would love to invite a lot of facilitators in who might want to learn this little twist on how they do their work. And then we see another role here, a change catalyst, someone who's a well-versed practitioner who can now catalyze this behavior change out in the field that is unique to their way of experiencing this in their lives. So they're modeling these ways of being and doing that then backs up the curiosity, inquiry, and exploration. So it could be someone like Melanie, who's really well-versed practitioner, who can respond to someone's post on Instagram or wherever, TikTok. They tried this and it worked, or they tried this and it didn't work. And Melanie could then pick up and respond back and say, well, have you tried this? Or this is what happened to me. This worked, or this didn't work. So it's a change catalyst that can take that experience and do more with it than just, seeing it or responding to it. Trae?
Melanie has her hand up.
Ah, sorry, yeah, but I can't see that. Thank you.
So I'm having, I got a little glitch back before where I heard you say, Marianne, that this is not a place where people can train or model in this kind of work. Can you say more about that? Because I'm hearing that it is.
Yeah, it is. Sorry. Yes. So what I'm trying to say is it's not like a normal e-learning course that you take and it's 6 weeks and you go through these things and then you're done, you get a certificate. That's not what this is. I mean, we could maybe set up something like that, but the point is more spewing out all these things that they need to learn and think about in short little clips that they can then try and see what happens, right? That's what the modeling is about, where you or I or somebody can see someone's post on TikTok saying, whoa, this is what happened when I listened deeply to my boss. And then you can pick up and go, yeah, that happened to me too. And did you try this, right? But they can really leverage, so the change catalyst can really leverage that learning with more information. So it's different than another practitioner responding. Can you see the difference?
I think so. What I hear almost goes towards how you market this, is that what if you could actually learn in a way that was fun and you were doing on your way rather than in your way?
Well, that's the whole point. And actually, when we get time banking involved with this whole thing, people can then time bank that, so they post, I tried this and it worked. And we're talking with, it could go into Catalyst, for example, and they can post that learning and then they can time bank, right? So now people are getting paid to learn, which is the opposite of today's world. We have to pay to learn. You now get paid to learn. You don't pay to learn. But yeah, that's the point, is that they tried in their everyday lives, and it's so much more effective than sitting in a course and you forget half of it by the time you're done, and then you don't really use it, right? So it's very different from that. So the inquiry clusters they could form spontaneously or they could form formally, where you get the change catalyst, the practitioners and facilitators, and getting them together because they want to practice this together. So these could be formal or informal. I think maybe they're just formal. Trae, you could probably say more about that. But it's really focused on how to do matrixing, right? So it's a way of learning how to do a matrix. And so another important thing to say is anybody who's in the orange space, they can still just be practitioners, as there's no need for anyone they have to become facilitators or anything else. Like, you can just be on the inside and be a practitioner. And anybody in a cohort, a practitioner cohort, there's no requirement for them to do anything else unless they get interested and want to do more in this whole picture. And then animateurs are facilitators who guide these inquiry clusters to do the matrixing. So they've learned how to do that piece. Okay, so that's a few it's explanations of how this is working. So there's an inside and an outside, like I explained, and there's a progression from left to right, and it looks like this high level. It starts by someone giving attention, right? So they might be struggling with emotional regulation, and they see a meme that helped them in some way, shape, or form. So now they're giving attention because they have an issue that they want to deal with, and this is worth giving attention to. That then could go into becoming aware. Oh, there's more to this than just that one thing, right? And there's a whole ladder of learning here, right? So now you're being aware, becoming aware. There's a lot here that I could dive into. And then there's the feeling of, I tried that and it felt like this, and it's different, right? And then you get excited and you want to share it. So then you continue moving, well, you can continue moving to thinking, oh, I could really learn all this stuff. It could be a facilitator who's been doing facilitation his or her whole life and getting interested in actually learning more. And this is when they then start moving into the cell, right? And wanting to learn more. Or just to keep exploring this, because this whole space will move from appreciation to dissent. I mean, there's so much in here. You could play around in this space for a long time before you then might be interested in moving across into more. I'm not sure if anybody had a question. No. Okay. So basically, what is in these stickies is the content of the e-learning. And an interesting thing I just want to point out here, sorry, my mouse is doing something different. So the DNA, the pattern integrity, is the heartbeat. That sticky had the highest count that we've seen so far. So that kind of makes sense that pattern integrity.
Did you just wake up?
Sorry, Melanie, you're not on mute. That the pattern integrity is driving so much of infinity, right? Another thing that also was surprised us that is driving so many things is the WINfinity's original orientation video audios, right? They drive a lot of things. And then communicating the value and experiencing the value of this collective-based, values-based decision-making also was a huge driver. And we realized that all these stickies that we had put up here were bookended by these three. So the DNA was one end, and the other end was the values-based decision-making. So when Trae sensed a lot of things, and then the arrows really validated it. It was very interesting to see. It happened a few times where, and I think all the green stickies here, Trae had guessed them all, and they were all in the high numbers. So it just kept happening that the numbers validated what we were seeing. I'm not going to go into too much more detail, I think. There's a lot to dive into here, but again, there's this progression of all these orange stickies, which are really focused on the pattern integrity in the DNA. So for example, building a matrix to understand how it can be used, moving on to facilitators need to learn indicators of group flow and coherence, have consideration for diversity and reality to each participant, and so forth. And this line here is another kind of progression where we talked about going from paying attention to becoming aware to feeling to thinking, now more engaging, right? So you're now, as a practitioner, engaging more and taking more action. So there's a progression that way as well. And there's a lot of good information in these gray stickies. They're kind of aha moments. So when you dive in, they're worth reading as well. So I think that's an overview. Is anything I forgot, Trae?
Oh, this feels good. Part of the reason why I had asked all of you if we could take one of these practitioner cohort gathering times to share all of this is because I want all of you who both are here on the call, as well as those who are not here and are going to be listening into the recording, that you need to understand, and this is part of the reason why we fundamentally chose to change the name of this group from apprenticeship or apprentices to practitioners, is because we really understood that people just simply practicing was the point. It wasn't about getting people apprenticing to become facilitators, to lead inquiry clusters, to become facilitators of matrixing, all of those pieces, right? I mean, and we knew that energetically, we knew that, we've known that for years, but we didn't have the language. We didn't know what we didn't know. This work with the stickies, because it has, and I will be honest with you, it's been arduous. It's not been the most efficient. Andrea, bless her, came and sat with us for a day with Marianne and I and kind of went, this is bloody like inefficient. You should have done it this way. And you should have done it. We're like, yeah, we know. Yeah, we know. But here's the thing. By virtue of the fact that this took as long as it did, and still is, and is still ongoing, and by virtue of the fact that Marianne literally had to force me, I kid you not, it was like trying to force an elephant to climb a tree. It was ridiculous. To force me to not think in flows, but to literally force me to think in one-to-one relationships only. There was no way I could contrive it. There was no way I could put Trae's personal spin on things. It was literally, does this connect with this? Yes or no? If it does, which way does the arrow go? And if it does go that way, why? And I'm just like, oh, for fuck's sakes, like, can we, like, do we need to keep going? And what's happened now is now the data is starting to reveal itself. Now the quantification of the arrows is starting to reveal itself. And now it's confirming or affirming, or in some cases, surprising us or me. And the average person might go, yeah, I get it. So what? Well, the so what is that it's no longer Trae 20 years later, just holding down the fort because she's the last woman standing and it's going through her filter. It is still fundamentally the field leading us and telling us where we need to go. And as hard as this has been, it has been incredibly rewarding. And I could not be engaging in this process with Marianne if all of you hadn't given your thoughts on these are the problems, these are the objectives, these are the things that need to be considered, all that stuff. I needed that. Otherwise, I would have done this years ago on my own. And it only exists because the collective exists. And so all of you that are meeting here on Fridays, whether you become facilitators or not, whether you become change catalysts like Michael Schumann, who got 39,000 views on a single TikTok post, it doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter. What matters is, are you just practicing in your day-to-day life, period? And the energy that you are holding, the heartbeat of the signature of the energy that is coming from this group just being there for each other, just sharing, just being present every second Friday is creating the magnetics, is creating the listening frequency, is creating what is now coming in. And I'm deeply, deeply grateful to all of you for just being who you are, being where you are, doing what you are. And I just wanted to say thank you.
And there's still so much more data. We got a mountain of data. Now it's just continuing to sit, right? This is just the beginning. Like there's so much interesting information in here now. So we'll be mining it for a while, for sure. I'd love to just do a round on clarifying questions or thoughts or anything that comes to mind. I would love to hear it, starting with Kylie.
Just
And then
incredible work that just looked amazing. I'd like to, if I can, to go in and have a look at things. So if I'm looking forward to the PDF for that. And the part that really jumped out at me that I'm so happy to see is the not having to go down the facilitator path as a condition for being able to be paid. And I don't mean that on a personal level. I'm actually just mean that as this is a general toxic pattern. I keep wondering how many people end up going and doing facilitator training and calling themselves facilitators who actually would be better off just as practitioners, just as participants, because facilitation is not their skill. And, you know, yes, I can say that would be a personal thing for me as well. You know, it's like, I don't mind. I've managed to do some facilitation and various things, and it's not my jam. You know, it's not what, you know, not what I'm here for. But practicing continually, and you know, being with others doing that as well, like, yeah, there's value in that I think gets missed. So I love it that you pulled that out so clearly.
Thank you, Kylie. Pranjit and then Andrea.
Sorry. Yes, I echo everything that Kylie said, up to the point that I also don't really feel like I'm a facilitator type of person, but I'm blown away by the comprehensiveness of what you've covered, and goodness knows what else you've got if you've still got loads. It just blows my mind, really. And it's very, very exciting because it does clarify a lot of other things around, okay, so what about that group? What about this group? How does this link with that? And it's kind of something that is cutting like a path that lots of things can spring out of. So well done, guys. Really, really well done.
Thank you, Pranjit. Andrea, and then I'm not sure if Melanie's there.
That was received as really clear, and yeah, no, just it landed. What I'm just finding is it's kind of like an like my body doesn't. It's a lot to absorb. There's a sense of who are we and what do we do-ness to it. It's not quite that, because it's, you know, this isn't what it's quite about, but that sense of all right, so then what's going on? So I'm feeling open, and like I'm not feeling drawn to do anything. I feel really connected, and like it landed, and there's no sense in my body of needing, and it's beautiful because I don't feel I need to do anything extra in this moment, like put up my hand, right? Like to say, oh yes, I'll do this thing. So that feels really balanced, and there's some kind of clarity to me about like this is a time just for being in here with you with this. I'm thinking about questions, inquiring questions or mirroring back. That part about this like the cell wall with the infinity symbol, yellow, orange. That was new and landed really quickly. That was a good, like it just landed as a, oh, well, that's an interesting way of looking at things, and just processing. You know, this work is, there's a bit of a sense of a bit of a miracle, just standing from afar, watching all these arrows that I know you can't even see the direction on because they're so small, and they accumulate so that to see each arrow, what Marianne has to do is zoom in to each one and track, you know, what that point is connected to. Like it's not even easy to find the arrow in that complicated diagram. And that strikes me as miraculous. You know, compost came up on my trip, and my sister-in-law was horrified that I said the womb is like compost. It's on compost time. It's not on the same timeline as jaw. And the miracle aspect kind of seems, or is feeling in compost time, like it's just happening. Like there's this movement through the arrows, and it's getting done, and it's you know, it's not pretty. It is, you know, it's very organic, very close to the earth, and that it's getting done is a miracle. So that just somehow needed to come out and get acknowledged. And out of the compost comes those numbers on those little cells you've got.
Yep. Okay, let's see. Melanie, are you there?
Yeah. So again, just deep appreciation for the amount of thought and effort. And I can sense like it wouldn't be my thing to do, but I can sense how this leads to the kind of clarity that you've been able to share. Where I go with it is the summation that there's an opportunity now to more clearly reach out to allow a wider group of people to understand that this simple practice, which can have the degree of depth that you want to have, right? That it can keep becoming more deep and have more avenues for expression and implementation, but that the simple practice becomes really available to people. And you know, I love that you resonated with on your way, not in your way. And that it is both reinforced because there is human interaction around the accomplishment of it. And that's built into the TikTok. And as I forget what you call them, but the people that respond back, you suggested, you know, maybe I find someone and respond back, and yeah, that's awesome. And I tried this, and there's this interaction around it, but also that you're meeting people's needs in this economy, in this world, to be recompensed for paying attention and being connected to it. So if that to me is like sort of the summation of what came out of this change catalyst. Thank you. That is a really wonderful direction for this to head. So thank you to all the arrow counters and all the work that went into this. Yeah, it feels really good. I'm complete with that.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And Trae, any other last things?
It's more of a just a, there was a reason why I jumped up and down when Andrea said what she said, because I look at Andrea's compass, and I'm going to call it a compass, her energetic compass, much like I look at Kylie's energetic compass. The massive bullshit detectors. Like, that's all I can say is massive bullshit detectors. And I value that so much, because my biggest fear has always been, well, why are we doing this? Well, because Trae says so. Well, why does Trae say so? And then Trae can't explain more shit, right? So it to me, again, the quantification of that which is previously unquantifiable, right? And coming to a place of, oh, okay, it's not just because Trae says so, right? I hate that. I don't want that. I'm not interested in being, trust me, I'm not a guru. Kylie sends me articles and sends me, these video clips from people, and they say half of what they say, and it blows right over my head, and my eyes glaze over, and I go, I'm sorry, I don't understand a thing that they're saying, right? So to me, the quantification of this is, and the fact that it is emerging collectively is just, I'm just repeating myself, but to me, it's just the most rewarding part of this work. And I just, yeah. So thank you, ladies, for all of you for being here, and for everybody who's watching this. And I just want to encourage you, the work is ongoing. It is still ongoing. And those of you who received the survey from me around emotional regulation and handling times of change, guess what? That's coming out of all of this. This is the stepping stone towards all of those yellow stickies and the masses practicing emotional regulation. It's all segueing, right? I'm doing that not just to build a business for Trae and to create an income stream for Trae, which would be helpful, but it's more, I'm motivated by what's going to help the field, what's going to help us move those yellow stickies forward. And that's where I'm playing. So just to make the connection for those of you who participated in that survey, because there's a whole bunch of other results that I can tell. I had a 70% response rate. They're still trickling in on, like, to have that on a survey is astounding, let alone the fact that there's not sentences, but there's entire paragraphs that people are writing. It's a hot topic. Yeah, Parmjit.
I have a question, Trae. So the people who have sent in their questionnaires, I know that some of them might well be interested in this conversation. Is that something that could be considered, like sending them?
It is something that will be considered. We're depending upon how this conversation went, we were going to determine whether or not this recording was going to go up on the WINfinity website, for example, or because I believe in transparency. I don't believe in just all of a sudden showing up at the end and going with a ta-da, right? Like, we're on the journey. Let's just be honest with the fact that we're on the journey, and whoever wants to play on the journey, come play, right? And we're still very much at the beginning of the journey. So those that resonate will be drawn in. I am convinced of it. We wouldn't be here otherwise, compared to where we were 3 years ago, with over 20,000 hours already now in time banked hours. This is a big deal. The foundation, the cornerstone is already here. So we're on our way.
Well, perfect. I think we have time for a checkout for a change. I don't have to run off. So maybe you've already kind of done it, but what do you appreciate and what are you curious about? At this time, I'm going to start with Parmjit.
I'm just curious about where this all goes. There's just so much happening at the moment, and it just feels like, yeah, this stuff is on fire. Yeah, so let's just wait and see, shall we? Thank you, and see you next time.
Thanks. Kylie and then Andrew.
I just I keep appreciating everything that you've done here. And you know, at the beginning, I kind of said that I've got these things kind of popping up here and there all over the place. Well, I just had another bunch of them happen. So gee, thanks for that. I mean, really, I'm just teasing. It's not a it's definitely not a bad thing. It's great. So I'm looking forward to seeing what else comes out, including with the emotional regulation survey, Trae, that you've been working on. So thank you. Thank you for having me here.
Thanks, Kylie. Andrew and then Trae.
I'm appreciating the depth of intelligence and space for that, different types of intelligence between all of us, and more specifically to the subject matter intelligence. Yeah, it's just the potentiality, the potential of it feels really ripe. And I'm curious. I don't really want to get into it right now, but I am curious to learn more specifically about that thread of time banking, the idea of people learning and getting, you know, paid as you go. Not how does it go? Getting paid as
You get paid to learn instead of paying to learn.
You're getting paid to learn, and
On your way, not in your way.
thank you.
Yes.
On your way, not in your way. So getting paid as you go on your way. To learn more about the actual mechanics. And I'm not speaking from my own interest. I'm speaking more from a it's going to be a page in the presentation at some point, but right now it's the composting of getting those numbers, like turning that close to the earth arrows into actual numbers. And there'll be it feels like the time isn't quite, the ripeness is for what's happening, the composting, whatever, and it feels like at some point there will be a you know, the standing in, right, let's explain more about this to folks. So that would be a curiosity, but it's not connected to any kind of personal or urgent perspective.
But yeah, that is an interesting topic for sure. Thank you, Andrea. Trae and then Melanie.
Appreciating everyone just simply being who they are and bringing who they are to this space and not feeling like they have to pretzel themselves into something that they're not. 100%. And what I'm curious about, in addition to the obvious, which is, oh my God, what else is there buried under all of those arrows that we haven't unearthed yet? But I'm curious about the bridging. And what I mean by that is that the bridge between being a practitioner and actually getting more matrixing going and collective matrixing going is the step of listening for values and mirroring back and asking clarifying questions in terms of listening for values in others and listening for values inside of small groups. That's the next micro step. And that is what I'm going to be ultimately, not immediately, but maybe come summer or by fall, I'll be saying to this practitioner group, who wants to practice that and who wants to focus in on that? If you do, let me know, because that's the next logical step. Because in doing that, if you genuinely do want to get to matrixing, and you want to get to matrixing, whether it's for yourself, family members, groups that you work with, whatever, the getting to the matrixing is actually quite simple once you've been practicing the muscle of listening for the values and formulating those values into questions. So just offering it up that's coming down the pipe. And I'm very curious to see how that's going to evolve, because I have no clue and I don't have a plan at this point. So that's the next logical step. Not at the expense of the practitioner's cohort just simply doing what it's already doing and being what it's already being. That is the heartbeat. That cannot change. And the fact that you guys are already doing that on your own without me, let's just say it's manna from heaven. And with that, I'm complete.
Thank you. Finally, Melanie.
So very much appreciating the potential that expresses when collective efforts put and people are in their brilliance. So I really feel so good about that. John, could you hold? Oh, you got it. Sorry, John's emptying the dishwasher. And the thing that I'm curious about, and Trae, you were very gracious in your reflecting back around this, is how we're going to craft the invitation so it's clear to people, so that what they're entering into is clear, why they're doing what they're doing is clear, and what the benefit is to them through a felt sense, a cognitive sense, addressing all the different learners. You know, some people it'll have to be direct experience before they get it. Other people want to see it laid out so they can understand it cognitively, visually, you know, all of those pieces. I'm really curious about how that'll happen, because of course that's what allows it to grow and then eventually get beyond us, which is exactly what we want. So yeah, so this was a great introduction to it, and I thank you all.
Thank you. Well, I think that's the end.
Okay.
The end of the
How are you
My-
checking out, Marianne?
Yeah.
Oh, right. Okay. Well, I appreciate all of you, and I appreciate getting a chance to show you what the ArrowSalad did. Every time I've done this in the past, it always blows people away. What are the drivers? Because they usually don't think of it, but then it's like, of course. But yeah, it's a fun experience to see the things that come out of the fuzziness of a process, right? A complicated system. All of a sudden these things pop out and it's like, oh, so these are the few things that we need to really take care of. Like it's a jet engine and it must never fail because it drives everything else. That's the magic of this. Some of the magic anyways, but yeah, it's fun to show you, and we'll see what else comes. And have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Blessings,
you.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll
Love
see
you guys.
everyone in 2 weeks next Friday, and we'll be back to our normal bat channel. Okay.
Okay.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
They